Daddy. The tiny voice cut through the airport noise so clearly that it didn't just reach him. It stopped him. Adrian Cole froze mid-step, his polished shoes halting against the glossy terminal floor as the steady hum of rolling suitcases, boarding announcements, and hurried conversations seemed to blur into the background. And for a split second, the entire world narrowed to that one word echoing in his ears. He turned slowly, almost unwillingly, as if his body understood something his mind refused to accept. And that's when he saw her. A little girl no older than 3, standing just a few feet away in the middle of the crowded departure hall, her small hand clutching the strap of a worn pink backpack, her wide eyes locked onto him with a certainty that didn't belong to a child her age. And before anyone could react, before logic could catch up, she broke into a run. Her tiny sneakers slapped against the polished floor as she closed the distance between them, weaving past travelers and luggage like she knew exactly where she was going. And then she reached him, wrapping her arms around his leg with surprising strength, pressing her cheek against the expensive fabric of his tailored suit, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, and said it again, softer this time, like a secret meant only for him. Daddy. Adrian's breath caught, not sharply, not dramatically, but in a quiet, almost imperceptible way that made his chest feel suddenly too tight, his gaze dropping slowly to the child clinging to him. And for a moment, just one moment, he didn't move, didn't speak, didn't even blink, because something about her face, about the shape of her eyes, the curve of her lips, the faint dimple that appeared when she smiled up at him with innocent certainty. It hit him somewhere deeper than reason, somewhere instinctive, and his expression shifted, the usual calm control of a man used to boardrooms and billion-dollar decisions cracking just slightly at the edges, his color draining just enough that anyone paying attention would notice. Around them, people had begun to slow, curious glances turning into lingering stares, whispers forming in the spaces between. Footsteps, because a man like Adrian Cole didn't go unnoticed. His presence commanded attention even on an ordinary day, and now, standing in the center of a busy airport with a child calling him daddy, that attention doubled, thickened, pressed in from all sides. One of his associates, a sharply dressed man walking just behind him, hesitated awkwardly, unsure whether to intervene or pretend nothing was happening, while a flight attendant passing nearby slowed her pace, her eyes flicking between the impeccably dressed CEO and the little girl wrapped around his leg like she belonged there. Adrian finally moved, his hand lowering almost automatically, hovering just above the child's head as if he wasn't sure whether he was allowed to touch her, as if that single gesture might confirm something he wasn't ready to face. And when his fingers brushed lightly against her soft hair, a strange, unfamiliar tension rippled through him, something dangerously close to recognition, something he couldn't explain. Hey, he said quietly, his voice lower than usual, controlled but edged with something uncertain, something that didn't belong to the man who negotiated mergers without blinking. I think you've got the wrong person. But even as he said it, the words felt hollow, like they were meant to convince himself more than anyone else, because the girl didn't let go, didn't hesitate, didn't even look confused. Instead, she tilted her head back to look up at him again, her small fingers tightening slightly against his suit as if she was afraid he might disappear, and smiled with a familiarity that didn't make sense, that shouldn't exist between strangers. And in that moment, something inside Adrian shifted just enough to unsettle him completely. The overhead announcement crackled to life, calling out a boarding group for a flight to Chicago, but he didn't hear it, not really, because his focus had narrowed entirely to the child at his feet and the unsettling realization creeping into his mind that this wasn't a simple mistake, that something about this moment, this place, this child, this word, was about to change everything, even if he didn't yet understand how or why. Adrian slowly crouched down, lowering himself to the child's level as if the shift in perspective might somehow make sense of what was happening. His movements measured, controlled, but his eyes no longer carried the same certainty they had just moments ago, because up close there was no denying it now, no easy dismissal, no convenient explanation that could erase what he was seeing. The girl's features were clearer here, sharper under the bright terminal lights, and his gaze traced them almost involuntarily, From the soft arch of her brows to the shape of her nose, to the way her lips curved when she looked at him like she already knew him, like she had been waiting for him, and it unsettled him in a way that no business risk or public scrutiny ever had, because this was not something he could calculate or control. He swallowed, his voice quieter now, less certain as he tried again. "Hey, what is your name?" And the girl beamed instantly, as if that question alone confirmed everything she believed, her small fingers loosening just enough from his suit so she could point to herself proudly. "Lily," she said, her voice bright and unguarded. And then, without hesitation, she reached up toward him in a silent request to be picked up, a gesture so natural, so instinctive, that Adrian hesitated for a fraction of a second too long before responding. Because something about that simple motion made his chest tighten again, made the situation feel dangerously real. Around them, the quiet attention of strangers had thickened into something heavier. People no longer pretending not to watch, phones subtly angled, conversations paused mid-sentence, and Adrian was acutely aware of it, of the image they were forming, of the questions already being built in the minds of those who recognized him. Yet for once, he did not move to correct it, did not step away or dismiss the scene, because his focus remained locked on the child in front of him. Slowly, almost cautiously, he lifted her into his arms, and the moment she settled against him, something shifted again, something deeper this time, because she did not hesitate or resist. She fit there as if she had done it 100 times before, her small hand resting against his shoulder with an ease that made his pulse falter. And as he looked at her from this new distance, closer still, the resemblance that had unsettled him before now pressed harder, undeniable in a way that made his thoughts scramble to keep up. His jaw tightened slightly, his mind racing through fragments of memory, faces, timelines, trying to place something that refused to fully surface. And then Lily reached up, her tiny fingers brushing against his cheek with innocent curiosity, her touch light but grounding. And she smiled again, softer now, almost relieved. "You found me," she said, as if that had always been the plan, as if there had never been a question of whether he would be here or not. And that single sentence hit him harder than anything else so far, because it carried an assumption, a history, something he did not remember but could not ignore. And for the first time, a flicker of something unfamiliar crossed his expression, not just confusion, not just shock, but the faint, unsettling beginning of doubt, the kind that does not disappear once it appears. Behind him, his associate shifted again, finally stepping closer with a cautious tone. "Mr. Cole, your flight." But Adrian did not respond, did not even glance back, because the world he had been moving through just minutes ago, the meetings, the schedules, the carefully controlled structure of his life, had quietly lost its hold on him, replaced entirely by the child in his arms and the impossible question now forming in his mind, a question he was not ready to voice, not here, not yet, but one that refused to be ignored any longer. "Lily." The voice came sharp and breathless from somewhere behind him, cutting through the tension with a kind of urgency that did not belong to the calm, controlled world Adrian was used to. And before he could turn fully, he felt it, the shift in the child's body, the way she suddenly leaned away from him, twisting in his arms with recognition, her small hands reaching past his shoulder toward the source of that voice. Adrian turned then, slowly but deliberately, and saw her, and for a moment, everything else fell away again. Just like before, because he knew that face, not vaguely, not distantly, but with a clarity that hit him all at once and without warning, as if a memory had been waiting just beneath the surface and finally forced its way through. Sophie Carter stood a few feet away, her chest rising and falling too quickly, strands of hair slipping loose from a hurriedly tied ponytail. Her expression caught somewhere between panic and something far more complicated, something she was trying, and failing, to hide. And the second her eyes met his, she stopped completely, like she had run straight into something she had not been prepared to face. Adrian felt his grip on Lily adjust slightly, not tighter, not possessive, but steady, grounding, as if he needed something real to hold on to in that moment. And his gaze did not leave Sophie's face, because now that he saw her clearly, there was no mistaking it, no room for denial, no convenient explanation left to reach for. Sophie, he said, her name leaving his lips before he could stop it. Low and controlled, but edged with something sharper, something that had not been there moments ago. And the sound of it seemed to hit her just as hard as everything else, because her shoulders stiffened, her eyes flickering with recognition that confirmed what he already knew. She stepped forward quickly, closing the distance with a forced composure that did not match the tremor in her hands as she reached for Lily. "I am so sorry," she said, her voice tight. Polite in the way people are when they are trying to fix something that cannot be easily undone. She gets confused sometimes, and she did not look directly at him when she said it. Her focus fixed instead on unwrapping Lily's arms from around him, her movements careful but rushed, like she was trying to undo the moment before it could take root. Lily frowned immediately, her small hands tightening in resistance, her voice rising just enough to draw more attention as she protested softly. "No, Mommy, that is him." And the words landed between them with a weight that made the air feel heavier, thicker, impossible to ignore, and Adrian's gaze sharpened, his expression no longer just unsettled but focused now, locked in on Sophie with a quiet intensity that replaced confusion with something far more dangerous, something closer to certainty. "Confused?" he repeated slowly, the word deliberate, measured, as if he was testing it, as if he was already finding it insufficient. And Sophie finally looked at him then, really looked at him, and whatever she saw in his expression made her hesitate, just for a second, just long enough for the truth of the moment to press in harder on. Both of them. The noise of the airport continued around them, announcements echoing overhead, footsteps passing by, conversations resuming in low murmurs, but inside that small space where they stood, it felt suspended, isolated, like the rest of the world had stepped back to watch what would happen next. And Adrian did not move, did not hand Lily over immediately, because something inside him had shifted into place, something that refused to let this end with a simple apology or a quick exit. "You disappeared," he said quietly, the words not loud but cutting through everything else with precision, and Sophie's breath caught visibly, her composure cracking just enough to reveal the truth she had been trying to hold back. And in that moment, with Lily still between them, still reaching toward him as if nothing about this was uncertain, Adrian understood one thing with absolute clarity. This was not a mistake. And whatever Sophie was trying to hide, it had just walked straight into his life in the middle of an airport, and he was not going to let it walk away again. Sophie's fingers finally closed around Lily's small arm, gently but firmly pulling her away from Adrian's hold. And this time he let her go, not because he was convinced, not because he accepted her explanation, but because something deeper told him that forcing the moment would only make her retreat further. And as Lily settled reluctantly against her mother's side, still looking back at him with confusion and quiet insistence, Adrian straightened slowly, the controlled posture of the man he had always been returning. But it was different now, sharper, more deliberate, his gaze never leaving Sophie, as if he were studying her, not just seeing her for who she was in this moment, but measuring everything that had changed since the last time he had seen her. Sophie adjusted Lily on her hip, her movements efficient, almost practiced, but there was a tension in the way she held herself, in the way her shoulders stayed slightly raised, like she was bracing for something she knew was coming. And when she finally met his eyes again, there was no more attempt to pretend they were strangers, no more effort to hide recognition, just a quiet, uneasy acknowledgement that whatever she had tried to avoid had just caught up with her. "I did not think," she started, then stopped, her voice trailing off as if she realized there was no sentence she could finish that would make sense here, not in front of him, not like this. And Adrian's expression hardened slightly at that, not with anger, not yet, but with a focus that carried far more weight than any raised voice could, because he was no longer reacting, he was processing, assembling pieces that had not fit before. "You did not think you would see me again," he said, his tone calm, almost conversational. But there was something beneath it now, something that made it clear he was no longer willing to accept half-answers or deflections. And Sophie's lips pressed together for a moment, her silence stretching just long enough to become an answer in itself. Lily shifted again, her small hand gripping Sophie's shoulder as she leaned slightly forward, still watching Adrian with that same unwavering certainty. And then, As if the tension between the adults did not exist, she spoke again, her voice softer now, but no less sure. "Mommy, he is not leaving this time, right?" And the question landed with a quiet force that neither of them could ignore, because it carried more than innocence. It carried expectation, memory, something that did not belong to a misunderstanding. Sophie inhaled slowly, her composure slipping just enough to reveal the strain beneath it, and she pulled Lily closer, pressing a quick kiss to the top of her head in a gesture that felt protective, almost instinctive, before looking back at Adrian with a guarded expression. "We should not do this here," she said, her voice lower now, more controlled. But there was an urgency behind it, a need to move, to escape the growing attention, the curious glances, the quiet whispers that had not faded. Adrian glanced briefly around them, taking in the reality of the situation, the public setting, the eyes that lingered just a second too long, the subtle recognition beginning to ripple through the crowd. And for a moment, it seemed like he might step back, might allow her to leave, might choose discretion over confrontation. But then his attention returned to Lily, to the way she was still watching him, still holding on to something he did not understand but could not dismiss. And that was enough to shift his decision. "You are right," he said evenly. And for a fraction of a second, Sophie's posture loosened as if she thought she had been given an exit. But then he continued, his tone firm now, unmistakably final. "We are not doing this here." And before she could respond, before she could step away, he turned slightly toward the security officer stationed near the terminal entrance, his voice calm but carrying the authority that came naturally to him. "I need a private room." And the simplicity of the request, the quiet confidence behind it, made it clear that this was no longer something she could walk away from, because Adrian Cole had made a decision, and whatever truth had just stepped into his life was not leaving without being answered. The shift from the open terminal to the quiet hallway happened faster than Sophie expected, and that alone unsettled her more than anything Adrian had said so far, because it reminded her exactly who he was now, not just the man she once knew, but someone whose decisions moved people, opened doors, changed situations without effort, and within minutes, they were being guided through a discreet side corridor, away from the noise and the watching eyes, toward a private lounge usually reserved for high-profile travelers. Sophie walked slightly behind, her grip on Lily firm but not tight, her mind racing through possibilities, explanations, consequences, none of them leading to anything simple, while Lily, unaware of the weight of the moment, rested her head against her shoulder but kept glancing back at Adrian with quiet curiosity, as if she was trying to make sure he was still there, still real, still not disappearing again. Adrian walked ahead at first, then slowed just enough to fall into step beside them, not speaking, not pressing yet. But his silence was not empty. It was deliberate, controlled, the kind that built pressure instead of releasing it. And when they finally entered the private lounge, the door closing softly behind them, the shift in atmosphere was immediate, the noise of the airport fading into a distant hum, replaced by a stillness that made everything feel more exposed, more real. Sophie set Lily down gently on one of the leather seats, brushing a strand of hair away from her daughter's face in a quiet, grounding motion before straightening, her eyes briefly scanning the room as if measuring distance, exits, options, but there were none that did not involve him. And she knew it. Adrian remained standing for a moment, watching both of them, his posture composed, his expression unreadable again, but the intensity in his gaze had not lessened. If anything, it had sharpened now that there were no distractions, no audience, just the three of them and the truth hanging between them. "Start talking," he said finally, his voice calm, even, but carrying a weight that made it clear this was not a suggestion, and Sophie let out a slow breath, one she had been holding since the moment Lily ran toward him, her shoulders lowering slightly as if she was choosing, not because she wanted to, but because she had run out of ways to avoid it. "It is not what you think," she said, the words automatic, familiar, the kind people reach for when they are trying to delay something inevitable. But Adrian did not react to them the way she might have hoped, did not argue, did not interrupt. He simply watched her, and that was worse, because it left her with nowhere to hide. Lily swung her small legs against the edge of the seat, her attention shifting between them, sensing the tension even if she did not understand it. And then, softly, she spoke again, her voice breaking through the heavy silence with a simple honesty that neither adult could control. "Mommy, why are you sad?" And Sophie's expression faltered for just a second, just long enough to reveal the truth she was trying to contain, before she forced a small smile, brushing Lily's hair back again, as if that alone could shield her from everything else. "I am not sad, sweetheart," she said gently. But her voice did not fully convince even herself. Adrian's jaw tightened slightly, his gaze flicking from Sophie to Lily and back again. And this time when he spoke, there was something different in his tone, something more direct, more cutting. "Then explain why she looks at me like she knows me." And the question landed exactly where it needed to, because Sophie did not answer immediately, could not, her silence stretching just long enough to become the loudest response in the room. And in that silence, Adrian felt it settle deeper. The suspicion, the realization, the possibility he had been holding at a distance now moving closer, becoming harder to deny, because this was no longer about a misunderstanding, no longer about a child's confusion. This was something constructed, something hidden, something that had been kept from him. And the longer Sophie stayed quiet, the clearer that truth became. The silence did not break, it stretched, deepened, settling into something that pressed against Adrian's thoughts with a steady, undeniable force. And for the first time since this began, he did not look at Sophie, not immediately, because his mind had already moved past the surface, past the obvious, into something colder, something more precise, the way it always did when something did not add up, when a situation refused to fit into the logic he trusted. He turned slightly, his gaze falling back on Lily, watching her not as a stranger now, but as a variable, a detail, a piece of something larger that was beginning to take shape whether he wanted it to or not. And as he studied her, really studied her, the pieces started aligning in a way that made his chest tighten again, not with confusion this time, but with a growing, uncomfortable clarity. Her age, he calculated it. Almost automatically, 3, maybe a little older, her speech, her awareness, her confidence, all pointing to a timeline that his mind began to reconstruct without permission, pulling him back to a moment he had not thought about in years, a night that had seemed insignificant at the time, or perhaps easier to forget, because forgetting had been simpler than questioning it. His jaw set slightly as the memory surfaced more clearly now, not in fragments, but in sequence, the last time he had seen Sophie before she disappeared, the tension that had already existed between them, the conversation that had ended without resolution, and then that one night that should not have happened, but did, brief, complicated, unspoken afterward, something both of them had chosen not to define, and then she was gone, no explanation, no closure, just absence, and he had accepted it for what it appeared to be, a choice she made, a chapter that ended without consequence. But now, standing here, with Lily, just a few feet away, that assumption no longer held. His eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in focus, as the timeline continued to align, the months, the gap, the silence, all of it forming something he could not ignore anymore. And when he finally looked back at Sophie, there was no hesitation left in his gaze, no uncertainty, just a quiet intensity that carried a single, unavoidable question. 3 years, he said slowly, the words deliberate, not raised, not emotional, but weighted. With calculation, that is about right, is it not? And Sophie's reaction was immediate, subtle to anyone else, but not to him. Her shoulders tightening, her breath catching just slightly, her eyes flickering away for half a second too long. And that was all it took, because for Adrian, silence was not neutral, it was confirmation. Lily shifted again on the seat, unaware of the gravity building around her, her small voice breaking in with the kind of honesty only a child could carry. "Mommy said you were busy," she offered quietly, as if she was helping, as if she was filling in something that had been left unsaid, and the sentence landed with a different kind of weight, softer but sharper in its own way, because it was not defensive, it was not constructed, it was simply true to her, and Adrian felt something shift again, not outwardly, not visibly, but internally, something colder, something steadier, replacing the last fragments of doubt he might have held on to. He exhaled slowly, not in frustration, not in disbelief, but in recognition, because the situation had crossed a line now, from possibility into probability, from suspicion into something much harder to dismiss. And when he spoke again, his voice had changed, not louder, not harsher, but more certain, more direct, stripped of everything except the truth he was now willing to face. "You knew," he said, his eyes fixed on Sophie, unblinking, unwavering. "You knew, and you said nothing." And this time, there was no room left in the statement for interpretation, no space for misunderstanding, because what stood between them now was not confusion, not coincidence, but a truth that had been hidden for years and was, finally, inevitably, being pulled into the light. The words did not echo loudly in the room, but they landed with a weight that made it impossible for Sophie to ignore them. And for a moment, she did not move, did not speak, because there was nothing left to deflect with, nothing left to soften what had already been understood, and Adrian saw it, not in what she said, but in what she did not say, in the way her silence settled into something final, something that confirmed more than any explanation could. He took a step closer, not aggressively, not forcefully, but with purpose, closing the distance just enough to remove any illusion of space between them, his gaze steady, unwavering, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a sharper edge now, not loud, but impossible to ignore. "Is she mine?" And the question cut through everything else, direct, stripped of hesitation, leaving no room for misinterpretation or escape. Sophie's breath caught, visibly this time, her composure slipping in a way she could no longer control, her eyes dropping briefly before lifting back to meet his. And in that brief moment, the answer had already formed, already existed in the space between them, even before she said anything at all. Lily looked between them, sensing the shift, the tension, her small hands curling slightly against the fabric of her mother's sleeve, as if she could feel the weight of something important happening. And then, softly, almost uncertain now, she spoke again. "Mommy?" And the simple word carried confusion this time, a quiet question that made Sophie's expression falter even further. Sophie closed her eyes for a brief second, not in defeat, but in decision, as if she had reached the point where holding back any longer would only make things worse. And when she opened them again, there was something different there, not panic, not avoidance, but a quiet acceptance of what could no longer be hidden. "Yes," she said finally, her voice low but steady enough to carry the truth clearly, and the single word seemed to shift the entire atmosphere of the room, not dramatically, not visibly, but in a way that made everything feel heavier, more real, more irreversible. Adrian did not react immediately, did not interrupt, did not move, because for a moment, everything inside him went still, the confirmation landing deeper than he had expected, deeper than he had prepared for, and his mind, usually so quick, so precise, slowed just enough to register the full weight of what that meant. Lily blinked, looking between them again, her expression softening as if something had been clarified in her small world, and then she smiled slightly, reaching out toward Adrian, again with the same quiet certainty she had shown from the beginning, as if nothing about this was surprising to her at all. Sophie watched that movement, her chest tightening, and this time when she spoke, there was something more behind her words, something that had been held back for too long. "I was going to tell you," she said, but even as the sentence left her lips, it sounded incomplete, insufficient, and Adrian's gaze sharpened instantly, catching the hesitation, the implication behind it, and his response came without delay, firm, controlled, but edged with something far more intense than before. "But you did not." And there was no accusation in his tone, not openly, but the weight of it was there, undeniable, because the truth was no longer hidden, no longer uncertain, and what remained now was not whether it existed, but why it had been kept from him for so long. The room fell quiet again, but this time it was different, not filled with confusion or doubt, but with something far more dangerous, something that came after the truth was revealed, when the real questions began, the ones that did not have easy answers, the ones that would change everything moving forward. Because now Adrian knew, and that knowledge was not something that could be undone. The confirmation did not explode into anger the way Sophie might have expected, and that, more than anything, unsettled her, because Adrian did not raise his voice, did not pace, did not react in any way that released the tension building in the room. Instead, he grew still, almost too still, his expression tightening just slightly, as if every emotion had been pulled inward and locked behind control. And when he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than before, but sharper, more precise. Why? And the single word carried more weight than anything else he had said so far, because it was no longer about what had happened. It was about the choice behind it. Sophie inhaled slowly, her fingers brushing absently over Lily's hair as if grounding herself in something real before answering. And for a moment, she hesitated again, not because she wanted to lie, but because the truth was not simple, not clean, and saying it out loud would not make it easier to understand. Because you made it very clear you did not want anything complicated in your life, she said finally, her voice steady but layered with something deeper, something that had been building for years, and Adrian's gaze shifted slightly, not away from her, but inward, as if he was replaying something she had just forced back into his awareness. That is not the same thing, he replied, his tone controlled, but there was a subtle edge to it now, something closer to frustration, not explosive, but undeniable, and Sophie shook her head lightly, a small, almost tired motion that carried more meaning than her words alone. It was enough for me to understand what I needed to do, she said, and this time there was no hesitation in her voice, no uncertainty, just quiet conviction. Lily shifted closer to her, sensing the change again, her small hand gripping Sophie's sleeve as she looked between them, her earlier confidence softening into something more uncertain, more aware, and she leaned slightly toward Adrian again, as if trying to reconnect something that felt like it was slipping away. Adrian noticed it, of course he did, and that small movement did something to him, something that made his jaw tighten just a fraction more, because this was no longer abstract, no longer distant. It was right in front of him, real, undeniable, and shaped like a child who looked at him like he belonged in her world. You decided for both of us, he said, not loudly, not accusingly, but with a clarity that made it impossible to ignore the weight behind it. And Sophie met his gaze without looking away this time, because she knew that part was true. I did what I thought was right, she answered, and there was no apology in her tone, not because she felt nothing, but because she had already lived with the consequences of that choice for years. The silence that followed was different again, not uncertain, not questioning, but filled with something heavier, something unresolved, and Adrian exhaled slowly, his hand moving to rest briefly against the back of a nearby chair, as if anchoring himself in the moment, because everything about this was shifting faster than he had anticipated. And yet, at the center of it all, one thing remained constant. Lily, watching him, waiting, her small voice breaking the tension once more, softer now, almost careful. Are you staying? And the question hung there, simple and direct, but carrying a weight neither adult could ignore, because it was not about the past, not about decisions already made. It was about what came next, and Adrian did not answer immediately, his gaze lowering to meet hers, something unreadable passing through his expression as the reality of that question settled deeper than anything else had so far. Because for the first time, this was not about what had been hidden from him. It was about what he was going to do now that he knew. Adrian did not answer right away, and that silence stretched just long enough to make Lily's small fingers tighten against the edge of the seat, her eyes searching his face with a quiet patience that did not belong to someone her age. And in that moment, something shifted again, not in the room, not in Sophie, but in him, because for all the control he had maintained, for all the logic he had relied on, this question did not fit into any calculation he knew how to make. He exhaled slowly, his gaze still fixed on Lily, and when he finally spoke, his voice was lower, steadier, but carrying something new beneath it, something less guarded. I am not going anywhere right now, he said, and the simplicity of the answer seemed to settle something in Lily immediately, her shoulders relaxing as a small, relieved smile formed, as if that alone was enough for her, as if the future did not need to be defined beyond this moment. Sophie watched that exchange closely, her expression tightening. Again, not with resistance this time, but with something more complicated, something that came from realizing that the line she had drawn years ago no longer existed in the same way, because Adrian was here now, and he was not stepping away. Adrian straightened slightly, his attention shifting back to Sophie, and whatever softness had appeared in his expression faded into something more composed again, more controlled, but not distant, not detached, just focused, deliberate, as if he had reached a decision that was not impulsive, not emotional, but inevitable. "This is not over," he said, his tone even, not threatening, not harsh, but absolute in a way that made it clear he meant every word, and Sophie nodded slowly, because she understood that too. There was no version of this where things returned to what they had been before, no simple resolution that would allow them to walk away unchanged. Lily shifted again, sliding off the seat and stepping closer to Adrian with a small, uncertain movement, and this time, she did not hesitate as she reached for his hand, her fingers wrapping around his with a natural ease that made his breath pause for just a fraction of a second, because there was no doubt in her, no hesitation, no question about whether she was allowed to do that. And for a moment, Adrian looked down at their joined hands as if trying to understand something that could not be explained through logic alone. Sophie watched it happen, her chest tightening again, not with regret exactly, but with the weight of everything that had led to this point. Every decision, every silence, every choice she had made, believing it was the right one. And now, standing here, she could not tell if it had been or not, because this moment, this connection, was real in a way she could not undo. Adrian lifted his gaze back to her, and when he spoke again, there was something final in his tone, something that marked a clear shift from questioning to action. "We will figure this out," he said, not as a suggestion, not as a possibility, but as a certainty, and Sophie held his gaze, understanding that this was no longer something she could control on her own, no longer something she could carry quietly without consequence. Lily squeezed his hand slightly, her voice soft but filled with quiet certainty as she looked up at him. "I knew you would come," and the words landed deeper than anything else she had said so far, because they were not hopeful, not uncertain, they were absolute, and Adrian felt it settle somewhere he could not ignore, because whether he had known it or not, whether he had chosen it or not, something had already begun long before this moment, something that had been waiting, quietly, until now. And as he stood there, holding his daughter's hand for the first time, he understood one thing with a clarity he could not escape. This was not just a truth revealed, it was a life he had not known existed, and now that it was in front of him, there was no walking away from it.